The DNC is doing everything they can to stop Senator Bernie Sanders from being the nominee. Their reasoning isn't as straightforward as one might think. It's the same reason conservatives should hope he prevails.
In this editorial, we cover the article by J.D. Rucker of the NOQ Report. Mr. Rucker gives 3 reasons why we should hope that Sanders wins the Democratic nomination and is subsequently defeated by President Trump in the general election. In addition, he explains how this result would splinter the Democratic Party, derail the far left's momentum in lower political offices, and wake Americans up, people up, to the failure of socialism. On February 3, 2020, President Trump tweeted, "The DNC on Bernie Sanders looks like they're going to do it to him again, doesn't it?" And back on January 23rd, this: "Crazy Bernie takes the lead in the Democratic primaries, but it is looking more and more like the Dems will never allow him to win. Will Sleepy Joe be able to stumble across the finish line? We shall see."
Over the past few weeks, President Trump has tweeted about Senator Bernie Sanders on a few occasions. Unlike tweets about other Democratic candidates, particularly Mini Mike Bloomberg, the president's tweets have not been negative towards Sanders. If anything, they are sympathetic of his campaign's plight against a Democratic National Committee that clearly doesn't want him to be their nominee. Meanwhile, the Democratic establishment is treating Sanders like kryptonite. They're pulling out all the stops, with leaders past and present quietly attempting to subvert the Democratic Socialist chances of winning the nomination.
Do you think the Democratic Party is trying to openly hurt your campaign?
Look, all I can say about Iowa is it was an embarrassment. It was a disgrace to the good people of Iowa who take their responsibilities in the caucuses very seriously. They screwed it up badly, is what the Iowa Democratic Party did.
They've even called on President Obama to not so subtly procrastinate about what could happen if Sanders were to win. Let's take a look at why their concerns are real and why they represent a reason for conservatives to quietly cheer him on. But before we go there, let me make one thing clear. By no means am I suggesting Republicans should engage in activities that would tilt the scale in favor of Sanders. Disingenuously registering as a Democrat or voting in their open primaries is a bad idea. Not because it wouldn't work, but because it's the type of dirty politics indicative of the left, not the right. We know Democrats engaged in such activities in 2016 when they thought a Trump nomination would ensure a victory for Hillary Clinton. Look how it turned out for them. We must take the high road and let them come to the conclusion on their own. With that said, there's nothing wrong with passively hoping for Sanders' nomination, which we should. This isn't about who the president can beat the easiest. In reality, the candidate doesn't matter a lot when it comes to the 2020 presidential election. If the president wins, it will be because the victory wasn't stolen from him by mainstream media and/or dirty tactics by Democrats. This is the victory to claim, and it would take a major manipulation by the left to prevent him from doing so. In that regard, the Democratic nomination is irrelevant. But there are real reasons we should hope that Sanders wins the nomination and is soundly defeated by President Trump in the general election. Here are 3 of them.
A rift in the Democratic Party.
One way or another, there will be a rift in the Democratic Party. It's already there in the form of an ugly crack in their so-called unity. Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi experienced this to some degree when she struggled initially to get universal Democratic support in her caucus. Though she eventually had the bulk of Democrats on Capitol Hill backing her, the outspoken minority led by the Squad became constant thorns in her side. If Sanders loses the nomination, this rift will grow slowly. His supporters will reluctantly jump on the anti-Trump bandwagon after leaving the pro-Sanders bandwagon, embracing their former establishment enemy, whether it's Joe Biden, Mike Bloomberg, or Pete Buttigieg. If Sanders wins the nomination, it's a different story. The rift won't grow slowly. It will splinter the party in a way we haven't seen since the demise of the Whigs. There are too many left-leaning Americans who simply will not abide by a socialist representing them. They will blame their hyper-leftist partisans for forcing them to get behind a man who used to gush over Venezuela's impressive government. When he loses to President Trump, they'll use Sanders' loss as the predicate to try to pull the party back to the middle. It's in this scenario that they will rip the party apart because the radical progressives will never give up the far left ground they've taken as their own. I'm not suggesting that the Democratic Party will go by the way of the Whig Party, but it has never been more possible.
Down ballot benefits.
Sanders is known for having rabid fans. In fact, he's second only to President Trump when it comes to packing venues with his supporters. But they're a bubble that represents a tiny portion of the Democratic electorate. The rest of the party will be lukewarm at best, citing the defeat of President Trump as the only valid rallying cry to support Sanders. But here's the problem. Lukewarm support doesn't just hurt the presidential candidate, it can kill off down-ballot candidates, especially since many will be forced to lurch left to attempt to match their presidential candidate's rhetoric. They will make themselves less electable while disheartening the Democratic establishment base. The results? Big wins for Republicans on Capitol Hill, in state elections, and in many cases, even local elections. Nothing keeps voters at home on a presidential election day like a candidate for their party that they believe cannot win.
Sending socialism back to its hole.
It wasn't that long ago when socialism was anathema to most Americans. Sanders' success in 2016 and the strong push by forces funded by the likes of George Soros have made the failed economic, political, and cultural ideology much more palatable to a larger number of Americans. The rise of the Justice Democrats is a result of this. Socialism, rebranded as Democratic Socialism, is gaining momentum around the country, especially among impressionable young voters. With universities around the nation acting as socialism indoctrination factories, there's a real risk for the first time in decades that Marxist principles can start to gain traction in far too many public offices around America. This will continue until they get their day in the court of public opinion. In other words, socialism will continue to rise in popularity until it's exposed in a high-profile election against conservatives willing to debunk it thoroughly. A Sanders nomination will give conservatives the opportunity to truly educate America about the realities of socialism. Few care enough today to look into it, but if Sanders wins, they'll take interest. That would be our time to teach them about the truth. Losing the nomination will only embolden the radical progressives in Sanders' camp. He needs to lose on a national, bipartisan scale. He needs to be defeated by President Trump so that those promoting his ideology can be sent back into their hole until the next scheduled rise in a couple of decades. Letting it linger in the minds of the hopeful could lead to the unthinkable, a future victory at the highest level. Facing Bernie Sanders is exactly what President Trump and the nation needs. It will kill three birds with one stone: splintering the Democratic Party, derailing the far left momentum in lower offices, and waking people up to the inefficacy of socialism.
But what do you think? Should conservatives and other freedom-loving Americans sit back and quietly root for a Bernie Sanders nomination? Moreover, do you agree that a Sanders defeat in a general election would be a long-standing and devastating blow to the socialist agenda in America? Comment below and let us know. And if you enjoy the content on this channel, please hit that like and subscribe buttons, the bell icon, and please share with your friends. It really helps to grow the channel. Thank you.